welcome. Today I thought I'd like to read some stories to you. I have a few selected already. I think I'll be reading at least three of them, but they're fairly short, so I might read more. We'll start. These stories have been written by Hans Christian Andersen, and I'm reading them from Gutenberg.org, and they are fairly old, and some of them aren't aren't really happy stories. So be warned. Like I want to start with the little match girl. The little match girl. It was dreadfully cold. It was snowing fast and was almost dark as evening came on. The last evening of the year. In the cold and the darkness, there went along the street a poor little girl, bareheaded and with naked feet. When she left home she had slippers on, it is true, but they were much too large for her feet, slippers that her mother had used till then, and the poor little girl lost them in running across the street when two carriages were passing terribly fast. When she looked for them, one was not to be found, and a boy seized the other and ran away with it, saying he would use it for a cradle some day when he had children of his own. So on the little girl went with her bare feet that were red and blue with cold. In an old apron that she wore were bundles of matches, and she carried a bundle also in her hand. No one had bought so much as a bunch all the long day, and no one had given her even a penny. Poor little girl! Shivering with cold and hunger she crept along, a perfect picture of misery. The snowflakes fell on her long flaxen hair, which hung in pretty curls about her throat, but she thought not of her beauty nor of the cold. Lights gleamed in every window, and there came to her the savory smell of roast goose, for it was New Year's Eve, and it was this of which she thought. In a corner formed by two houses, one of which projected beyond the other, she sat cowering down. She had drawn under her little feet, but still she grew colder and colder. Yet she dared not go home, for she had sold no matches and could not bring a penny of money. Her father would certainly beat her, and besides, it was cold enough at home, for they had only the house roof above them, and though the largest holes had been stopped with straw and rags, there were left many through which the cold wind could whistle. And now her little hands were nearly frozen with cold. Alas! a single match might do her good, if she might only draw it from the bundle, rub it against the wall, and warm her fingers by it. So at last she drew one out. Whoosh! How it blazed and burned! It gave out a warm, bright flame like a little candle, as she held her hands over it. A wonderful little light it was. It really seemed to the little girl as if she sat before a great iron stove, with polished brass feet and brass shovel and tongs. So blessedly it burned that the little maiden stretched out her feet to warm them also. How comfortable she was! But lo, the flame went out, the stove vanished, and nothing remained but the little burnt match in her hand. She rubbed another match against the wall. It burned brightly, and where the light fell upon the wall, it became transparent like a veil, so that she could see through it into the room. A snow-white cloth was spread upon the table, on which was beautiful china dinner service, while a roast goose stuffed with apples and prunes steamed famously and sent forth a most savory smell. And what was more delightful still, and wonderful, the goose jumped from the dish, with knife and fork still in its breast, and waddled along the floor straight to the little girl. But the match went out then, and nothing was left to her but the thick, damp wall. She lighted another match, and now she was under a most beautiful Christmas tree, larger and far more prettily trimmed than the other one she had seen through the glass doors at the rich merchant's. Hundreds of wax tapers were burning on the green branches, and gay figures, such as she had seen in shop windows, looked down upon her. The child stretched out her hands to them. Then the match went out. Still, the lights of the Christmas tree rose higher and higher. She saw them now as stars in heaven, and one of them fell, forming a long trail of fire. "Now someone is dying," murmured the child softly, for her grandmother, the only person who had loved her, and was now dead, had told her that whenever a star falls, a soul mounts up to God. She struck yet another match against the wall, and again it was light, and in the brightness there appeared before her the dear old grandmother, bright and radiant, yet sweet and mild, and happy as she had never looked on earth. "Oh, grandmother!" cried the child, "take me with you. I know you will go away when the match burns out. You, too, will vanish, like the warm stove, the splendid New Year's feast, the beautiful Christmas tree." And lest her grandmother should disappear, she rubbed the whole bundle of matches against the wall. And the matches burned with such brilliant light that it became brighter than noonday. Her grandmother had never looked so grand and beautiful. She took the little girl in her arms, and both flew together, joyously and gloriously, mounting higher and higher, far above the earth, and for them there was neither hunger, nor cold, nor care. They were with God. But in the corner, at the dawn of day, sat the poor girl, leaning against the wall, with red cheeks and smiling mouth, frozen to death on the last evening of the old year. Stiff and cold, she sat, with the matches, one bundle of which was burned. She wanted to warm herself, poor little thing, people said. No one imagined what sweet visions she had had, or how gloriously she had gone with her grandmother to enter upon the joys of a new year. Next will be the steadfast tin soldier. There were once 25 tin soldiers. They were brothers, for they had all been made out of the same old tin spoon. They all shouldered their bayonets, held themselves upright, and looked straight before them. Their uniforms were very smart looking, red and blue, and very splendid. The first thing they heard in the world, when the lid was taken off the box in which they lay, was the words, "Tin soldiers!" These words were spoken by a little boy, who clapped his hands for joy. The soldiers had been given him because it was his birthday, and now he was putting them out upon the table. Each was exactly like the rest, to a hair, except one, who had but one leg. He had been cast last of all, and there had not been quite enough tin to finish him, but he stood as firmly upon his one leg as the others upon their two, and it was he whose fortunes became so remarkable. On the table, where the tin soldiers had been set up, were several other toys, but the one that attracted most attention was a pretty little paper castle. Through its tiny windows one could see straight into the hall. In front of the castle stood little trees, clustering round a small mirror, which was meant to represent a transparent lake. Swans of wax swarmed upon its surface, and it reflected back their images. All this was very pretty, but prettiest of all was the little lady who stood at the castle's open door. She, too, was cut out of paper, but she wore a frock of the clearest gauze and narrow blue ribbon over her shoulders, like a scarf, and in the middle of the ribbon was placed a shining tinsel rose. The little lady stretched out both her arms, for she was a dancer, and then she lifted one leg so high that the soldier quite lost sight of it. He thought that, like himself, she had but one leg. That would be just the wife for me, thought he, if she were not too grand. But she lives in a castle, while I have only a box, and there are 25 of us in that. It would be no place for a lady. Still, I must try to make her acquaintance. A snuff-box happened to be upon the table, and he lay down at full length behind it, and here he could easily watch the dainty lady, who still remained standing on one leg without losing her balance. When the evening came, all the other tin soldiers were put away in their box, and the people in the house went to bed. Now the playthings began to play in their turn. They visited, fought battles, and gave balls. The tin soldiers rattled in the box, for they wished to join the rest, but they could not lift the lid. The nutcrackers turned somersaults, and the pencil jumped about in a most amusing way. There was such a din that the canary woke and began to speak, and in verse too. The only ones who did not move from their places were the tin soldiers and the lady dancer. She stood on tiptoe with outstretched arms, and he was just as persevering on his one leg. He never once turned away his eyes from her. 12 o'clock struck. Crash! Up sprang the lid of the snuff-box. There was no snuff in it, but a little black goblin. You see, it was not a real snuff-box, but a jack-in-the-box. "Tin soldier," said the goblin, "keep thine eyes to thyself. Gaze not at what does not concern thee." But the tin soldier pretended not to hear. "Only wait, then, till tomorrow," remarked the goblin. The next morning, when the children got up, the tin soldier was placed on the window-sill, and whether it was the goblin or the wind that did it, all at once the window flew open, and the tin soldier fell head foremost from the third story to the street below. It was a tremendous fall. Over and over he turned in the air, till at last he rested, his cap and bayonet sticking fast between the paving stones, while his one leg stood upright in the air. The maidservant and the little boy came down at once to look for him, but though they nearly trod upon him, they could not manage to find him. If the soldier had but once called, "Here I am," they might easily enough have heard him, but he did not think it becoming to cry out for help, being in uniform. It now began to rain. Faster and faster fell the drops, until there was a heavy shower, and when it was over, two street boys came by. "Look you," said one, "there lies a tin soldier. He must come out and sail in a boat." So they made a boat out of an old newspaper, and put the tin soldier in the middle of it, and away he sailed, down the gutter, while the boys ran along by his side, clapping their hands. Goodness, how the waves rocked that paper boat, and how fast the stream ran! The tin soldier became quite giddy, the boat veered round so quickly. Still he moved not a muscle, but looked straight before him and held his bayonet tightly. All at once the boat passed into a drain, and it became as dark as his own old home in the box. "Where am I going now?" thought he. "Yes, to be sure, it is all that goblin's doing. Ah, if the little lady were but sailing with me in the boat, I would not care if it were twice as dark." Just then a great water rat that lived under the drain darted suddenly out. "Have you a passport?" asked the rat. "Where is your passport?" But the tin soldier kept silence, and only held his bayonet with a firmer grasp. The boat sailed on, but the rat followed. Whew! How he gnashed his teeth and cried to the sticks and straws. "Stop him! Stop him! He hasn't paid toll! He hasn't shown his passport!" But the stream grew stronger and stronger. Already the tin soldier could see daylight at the point where the tunnel ended, but at the same time he heard a rushing, roaring noise, at which a bolder man might have trembled. Think! Just where the tunnel ended, The drain widened into a great sheet that fell into the mouth of the sewer. It was as perilous a situation for the soldier as sailing down a mighty waterfall would be for us. He was now so near it that he could not stop. The boat dashed on, and the tin soldier held himself so well that no one might say of him that he so much as winked an eye. 3 or 4 times the boat whirled round and round. It was full of water to the brim, and must certainly sink. The tin soldier stood up to his neck in water. Deeper and deeper sank the boat, softer and softer grew the paper, and now the water closed over the soldier's head. He thought of the pretty little dancer whom he should never see again, and in his ears rang the words of the song: "Wild adventure, mortal danger, be thy portion, valiant stranger." The paper boat parted in the middle, and the soldier was about to sink, when he was swallowed by a great fish. Oh, how dark it was! Darker even than in the drain, and so narrow! But the tin soldier retained his courage. There he lay at full length, shouldering his bayonet as before. To and fro swam the fish, turning and twisting, and making the strangest movements, till at last he became perfectly still. Something like a flash of daylight passed through him, and a voice said, "Tin soldier!" The fish had been caught, taken to market, sold and bought, and taken to the kitchen, where the cook had cut him with a large knife. She seized the tin soldier between her finger and thumb and took him to the room where the family sat, and where all were eager to see the celebrated man who had travelled in the maw of a fish. But the tin soldier remained unmoved. He was not at all proud. They set him upon the table there. But how could so curious a thing happen? The soldier was in the very same room in which he had been before. He saw the same children, the same toys stood upon the table, and among them the pretty dancing maiden, who still stood upon one leg. She too was steadfast. That touched the tin soldier's heart. He could have wept tin tears, but that would not have been proper. He looked at her, and she looked at him, but neither spoke a word. And now one of the little boys took the tin soldier and threw him into the stove. He gave no reason for doing so, but no doubt the goblin in the snuff box had something to do with it. The tin soldier stood now in a blaze of red light. The heat he felt was terrible, but whether it proceeded from the fire or from the love in his heart, he did not know. He saw that the colors were quite gone from his uniform, but whether that had happened on the journey or had been caused by grief, no one could say. He looked at the little lady. She looked at him, and he felt himself melting. Still, he stood firm as ever, with his bayonet on his shoulder. Then, suddenly, the door flew open. The wind caught the dancer, and she flew straight in the stove to the tin soldier, flashed up in a flame, and was gone. The tin soldier melted into a lump, and in the ashes the maid found him next day in the shape of a little tin heart, while of the dancer nothing remained save the tinsel rose, and that was burned as black as coal. The third story I want to read is The Nightingale. In China, as you well know, the emperor is Chinese, and all around him are Chinese also. Now, what I am about to relate happened many years ago, but even on that very account, it is the more important that you should hear the story now, before it is forgotten. The emperor's palace was the most magnificent palace in the world. It was made entirely of fine porcelain, exceedingly costly, but at the same time so brittle that it was dangerous even to touch it. The choicest flowers were to be seen in the garden, and to the most splendid of all these little silver bells were fastened, in order that their tinkling might prevent any one from passing by without noticing them. Yes, everything in the emperor's garden was excellently well arranged, and the garden extended so far that even the gardener did not know the end of it. Whoever walked beyond it, however, came to a beautiful wood, with very high trees, and beyond that to the sea. The wood went down quite to the sea, which was very deep and blue. Large ships could sail close under the branches, and among the branches dwelt a nightingale who sang so sweetly that even the poor fisherman, who had so much else to do when he came out at night time to cast his nets, would stand still and listen to her song. "Oh, how pretty that is!" he would say, but then he was obliged to mind his work and forget the bird. Yet the following night, if again the nightingale sang, and the fisherman came out, again he would say, "Oh, how pretty that is!" Travelers came from all parts of the world to the emperor's city, and they admired the city, the palace, and the garden. But if they heard the nightingale, all they said, "This is the best." And they talked about her after they went home, and learned men wrote books about the city, the palace, and the garden. Nor did they forget the nightingale. She was extolled above everything else, and poets wrote the most beautiful verses about the nightingale of the wood near the sea. These books went round the world, and one of them at last reached the emperor. He was sitting in his golden armchair. He read and nodded his head at every moment, for these splendid descriptions of the city, the palace, and the garden pleased him greatly. But the nightingale is the best of all, was written in the book. "What in the world is this?" said the emperor. "The nightingale? I do not know it at all. Can there be such a bird in my empire, in my garden even, without my having even heard of it? Truly one may learn something from books." So he called his cavalier. Now this was so grand a personage that no one of inferior rank might speak to him, and if one did venture to ask him a question, his only answer was "Pish," which had no particular meaning. "There is said to be a very remarkable bird here, called the nightingale," said the emperor. "Her song, they say, is worth more than anything else in all my dominions. Why has no one ever told me of her?" "I have never before heard her mentioned," said the cavalier. "She has never been presented at court." "I wish her to come and sing before me this evening," said the emperor. "The whole world knows what I have, and I do not know it myself." "I have never before heard her mentioned," said the cavalier, "but I will seek her. I will find her." But where was she to be found? The cavalier ran up one flight of steps, down another, through halls and through passages. Not one of all whom he had met had ever heard of the nightingale, and the cavalier returned to the emperor and said, "It must certainly be an invention of the man who wrote the book. Your imperial majesty must not believe all that is written in books. Much in them is pure invention, and there is what is called the black art." "But the book in which I have read it," said the emperor, "was sent me by the high and mighty Emperor of Japan, and therefore it cannot be untrue. I wish to hear the nightingale. She must be here this evening, and if she do not come after supper, the whole court shall be flogged." "Sing pe," said the cavalier, and again he ran upstairs, downstairs, through the halls, through the passages, and half the court ran with him, for not one would have relished the flogging. Many were the questions asked respecting the wonderful nightingale, whom the whole world talked of, and about whom no one at the court knew anything. At last they met a poor little girl in the kitchen, who said, "Oh, yes, the nightingale. I know her well. Oh, how she can sing! Every evening I carry the fragments left at table to my poor sick mother. She lives by the seashore, and when I am coming back and stay to rest a little in the wood, I hear the nightingale sing. It makes the tears come into my eyes. It is just as if my mother kissed me." "A little kitchen maiden," said the cavalier. "I will procure for you a sure appointment in the kitchen, together with permission to see his majesty the emperor dine, if you will conduct us to the nightingale, for she is expected at court this evening." So they went together to the wood, where the nightingale was accustomed to sing, and half the court went with them. Whilst on their way, a cow began to low. "Oh," said the court pages, "now we have her. It is certainly an extraordinary voice for so small an animal. Surely I have heard it somewhere before." "No, those are cows you are lowing," said the little kitchen maid. "We are still far from the place." The frogs were now croaking in the pond. That is famous, said the chief court preacher. Now I hear her. It sounds just like the little church bells. No, those are frogs, said the little kitchen maid. But now I think we shall soon hear her. Then the nightingale began to sing. There she is, said the little girl. Listen, listen, there she sits. And she pointed to a little grey bird up in the branches. Is it possible? Said the cavalier. I should not have thought it. How simple she looks! She must certainly have changed colour at the sight of so many distinguished personages. Little nightingale, called out the kitchen maid, our gracious emperor wishes you to sing something to him. With the greatest pleasure, said the nightingale, and she sang in such a manner that it was delightful to hear her. It sounds like glass bells, said the cavalier, and look at her little throat, how it moves. It is singular that we should never have heard her before. She will have great success at court. Shall I sing again to the emperor? Asked the nightingale, for she thought the emperor was among them. Most excellent nightingale, said the cavalier. I have the honor to invite you to a court festival, which is to take place this evening, when his imperial majesty will be enchanted with your delightful song. My song would sound far better among the great green trees, said the nightingale. However, she followed willingly when she heard that the emperor wished it. There was a regular trimming and polishing at the palace. The walls and the flowers, which were all of porcelain, glittered with 1,000 gold lamps. The loveliest flowers, with the merriest tinkling bells, were placed in the passages. There was a running to and fro, which made all the bells stirring, so that one could not hear his own words. In the midst of the grand hall, where the emperor sat, a golden perch was erected, on which the nightingale was to sit. The whole court was present, and the little kitchen maid received permission to stand behind the door, for she had now actually the rank and title of maid of the kitchen. All were dressed out in their finest clothes, and all the eyes were fixed upon the little grey bird, to whom the emperor nodded as a signal for her to begin. And the nightingale sang so sweetly that tears came into the emperor's eyes. Tears rolled down his cheeks, and the nightingale sang more sweetly still, and touched the hearts of all who heard her. And the emperor was so merry that he said, the nightingale should have golden slippers and wear them round her neck. But the nightingale thanked him and said she was already sufficiently rewarded. I have seen tears in the emperor's eyes. That is the greatest reward I can have. The tears of an emperor have a particular value. Heaven knows I am sufficiently rewarded. And then she sang again with her sweet, lovely voice. It is the most amiable coquetry ever known, said the ladies present, and they put water into their mouths, and tried to move their throats as she did when they spoke. They thought to become nightingales also. Indeed, even the footmen and chambermaids declared that they were quite contented, which was a great thing to say, for of all people they are the most difficult to satisfy. Yes, indeed, the nightingale's success was complete. She was now to remain at court, to have her own cage, with permission to fly out twice in the day and once in the night. 12 attendants were allotted to her, who were to hold a silken band fastened round her foot, and they kept good hold. There was no pleasure in excursions made in this manner. All the city was talking of the wonderful bird, and when two persons met, one would say only night, and the other gale, and then they sighed, and understood each other perfectly. Indeed, 11 of the children of the citizens were named after the nightingale, but none of them had her tones in their throats. One day a large parcel arrived for the emperor, on which was written Nightingale. Here we have another new book about our far famed bird, said the emperor. But it was not a book. It was a little piece of mechanism lying in a box, an artificial nightingale, which was intended to look like the living one, but was covered all over with diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. When this artificial bird had been wound up, it could sing one of the tunes that the real nightingale sang, and its tail, all glittering with silver and gold, went up and down all the time. A little band was fastened round its neck, on which was written, "The nightingale of the Emperor of China is poor compared with the nightingale of the Emperor of Japan." "That is famous," said everyone, and he who had brought the bird obtained the title of Chief Imperial Nightingale Bringer. "Now they shall sing together. We will have a duet." And so they must sing together, but it did not succeed, for the real nightingale sang in her own way, and the artificial bird produced its tones by wheels. "It is not his fault," said the artist. "He keeps exact time and quite according to the method." So the artificial bird must now sing alone. He was quite as successful as the real nightingale, and then he was so much prettier to look at. His plumage sparkled like jewels. 33 times he sang one and the same tune, and yet he was not weary. Every one would willingly have heard him again. However, the emperor now wished the real nightingale should sing something. But where was she? No one had remarked that she had flown out of the open window, flown away to her own green wood. "What is the meaning of this?" said the emperor, and all the courtiers abused the nightingale and called her a most ungrateful creature. "We have the best bird at all events," said they, and for the 34th time they heard the same tune. But still they did not quite know it, because it was so difficult. The artist praised the bird inordinately. Indeed, he declared it was superior to the real nightingale, not only in its exterior, all sparkling with diamonds, but also intrinsically. "For see, my noble lords, his imperial majesty, especially with the real nightingale, one could never reckon on what was coming, but everything settled with the artificial bird. He will sing in this own one way, and no other. This can be proved, he can be taken to pieces, and the works can be shown, where the wheels lie, how they move, and how one follows from another." "That is just what I think," said everybody, and the artist received permission to show the bird to the people on the following Sunday. They too should hear him sing, the emperor said. So they heard him, and were as well pleased as if they had all been drinking tea, for it is tea that makes Chinese merry, and they all said, "Oh!" and raised their forefingers and nodded their heads. But the fisherman, who had heard the real nightingale, said, "It sounds very pretty, almost like the real bird, but yet there is something wanting. I do not know what." The real nightingale was, however, banished, the emperor. The artificial bird had his place on a silken cushion, close to the emperor's bed. All the presents he received, gold and precious stones, lay round him. He had obtained the rank and title of High Imperial Dessert Singer, and therefore his place was number one on the left side. For the emperor thought that the side where the heart was situated must be the most honorable, and the heart is situated on the left side of an emperor, as well as with other folks. And the artist wrote 25 volumes about the artificial bird, with the longest and most difficult words that are to be found in the Chinese language. So of course all said they had read and understood them, otherwise they would have been stupid, and perhaps would have been flogged. Thus it went on for a year. The emperor, the court, and all the Chinese knew every note of the artificial bird's song by heart, but that was the very reason they enjoyed it so much. They could now sing with him. The little boys in the street sang "Zi, cluck, cluck, cluck," and the emperor himself sang too. Yes, indeed, that was charming. But one evening, when the bird was in full voice and the emperor lay in bed and listened, there was suddenly a noise. "Bang!" said the bird. Then something sprang. "Whir, whir, 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 whir." All the wheels were running about, and the music stopped. The emperor jumped quickly out of bed and had his chief physician called. But of what use could he be? Then a clockmaker was fetched, and at last, after a great deal of discussion and consultation, the bird was in some measure put to rights again. But the clockmaker said he must be spared much singing, for the pegs were almost worn out, and it was impossible to renew them, at least so that the music should be correct. There was great lamentation, for now the artificial bird was allowed to sing only once a year, and even then there were difficulties. However, the artist made a short speech, full of his favorite long words, and said the bird was as good as ever. So then, of course, it was as good as ever. When 5 years were passed away, a great affliction visited the whole empire, for in their hearts the people thought highly of their emperor, and now he was ill, and it was reported that he could not live. A new emperor had already been chosen, and the people stood in the street, outside the palace, and asked the cavalier how the emperor was. "Pish!" he said, and shook his head. Cold and pale lay the emperor in his magnificent bed. All the court believed him to be already dead, and everyone had hastened away to greet the new emperor. The men ran out for a little gossip on the subject, and the maids were having a grand coffee party. The floors of all the rooms and passages were covered with cloth, in order that not a step should be heard. It was everywhere so still, so still. The emperor was not yet dead. Stiff and pale, he lay in a splendid bed, with the long velvet curtains and heavy gold tassels. A window was opened above, and the moon shone down on the emperor and the artificial bird. The poor emperor could scarcely breathe. It appeared to him as though something was sitting on his chest. He opened his eyes, and saw that it was Death, who had put on the emperor's crown, and with one hand held the golden scimitar, with the other the splendid imperial banner, whilst from under the folds of the thick velvet hangings the strangest looking heads were seen peering forth, some with an expression absolutely hideous, and others with an extremely gentle and lovely aspect. They were the bad and the good deeds of the emperor, which were now all fixing their eyes upon him, whilst death sat on his heart. "Dost thou know this?" they whispered one after another. "Dost thou remember that?" And they began reproaching him in such a manner that the sweat broke out upon his forehead. "I have never known anything like it," said the emperor. "Music, music, the great Chinese drum!" cried he. "Let me not hear what they are saying." They went on, however, and Death, quite in the Chinese fashion, nodded his head to every word. "Music, music!" cried the emperor. "Thou dear little artificial bird! Sing, I pray thee, sing! I have given thee gold and precious stones. I have even hung my golden slippers round thy neck. Sing, I pray thee, sing!" But the bird was silent. There was no one there to wind him up, and he could not sing without this. Death continued to stare at the emperor with his great hollow eyes, and everywhere it was still, fearfully still. All at once the sweetest song was heard from the window. It was the little living nightingale, who was sitting on a branch outside. She had heard of the emperor's severe illness, and was come to sing to him of comfort and hope. As she sang, the spectral forms became paler and paler, the blood flowed more and more quickly through the emperor's feeble members, and even Death listened and said, "Go on, little nightingale, go on. Wilt thou give me the splendid gold scimitar? Wilt thou give me the gay banner and the emperor's crown?" And the Death gave up all these treasures for a song, and the nightingale sang on. She sang of the quiet churchyard, where white roses blossom, where the lilac sends forth its fragrance, and the fresh grass is bedewed with the tears of sorrowing friends of the departed. Then Death was seized with a longing after his garden, and like a cold white snow shadow flew out at the window. "Thanks, thanks," said the emperor. Thou heavenly little bird, I know thee well. I have banished thee from my realm, and thou hast sung away those evil faces from my bed, and death from my heart. How shall I reward thee? Thou hast already rewarded me, said the nightingale. I have seen tears in thine eyes, as when I sang to thee for the first time. Those I shall never forget. They are jewels, which do so much good to a minstrel's heart. But sleep now, and wake fresh and healthy. I will sing thee to sleep. And she sang, and the emperor fell into a sweet sleep. Oh, how soft and kindly was that sleep! The sun shone in at the window when he awoke, strong and healthy. Not one of his servants had returned, for they all believed him dead. The nightingale still sat and sang. Thou shalt always stay with me, said the emperor. Thou shalt only sing when it pleases thee, and the artificial bird I will break into 1,000 pieces. Do not so, said the nightingale. Truly he has done what he could. Take care of him. I cannot stay in the palace, but let me come when I like. I will sit on the branches close to the window in the evening and sing to thee, that thou mayest become happy and thoughtful. I will sing to thee of the joyful and the sorrowing. I will sing to thee of all that is good or bad, which is concealed from thee. The little minstrel flies afar to the fisherman's hut, to the peasant's cottage, to all who are far distant from thee and thy court. I love thy heart more than thy crown, and yet the crown has an odor of something holy about it. I will come, I will sing, but thou must promise me one thing. Everything, said the emperor, and now he stood in his imperial splendor, which he had put on himself, and held the scimitar so heavy with gold to his heart. One thing I beg of thee, let no one know that thou hast a little bird who tells thee everything. Then all will go on well. And the nightingale flew away. The attendants came in to look at their dead emperor. Lo! There they stood, and the emperor said, Good morning. Those were the nightingale, the steadfast tin soldier, and the little match girl. And those are all the stories I will read today. Thank you for listening.